Hello, driving intelligence community. It's been a long time since I've worked on this Kawasaki, but it's time to get back with it. Need to get it on the market for sale. Maybe some of you are interested. Anyway, these brakes are locked up, and today's project is figuring out what the problem is with these brakes. Stay tuned. When I first started working on this bike, these brakes were completely locked up. I could not move it, so I actually sprayed WD-40 on the rotor to allow it to slide through the caliper. So I got to figure out why these calipers are bound. First thing I'm going to do to resolve the brake freeze is see how much moisture is in this brake master cylinder. I'm going to open that up. There might be corrosion that's causing rust and contaminants to prevent that brake from releasing or even engaging. Bleeding brakes in a motorcycle is no different than bleeding brakes in a car or truck, and it's actually much easier. You have much better access to the brake, the master cylinder, and the port that you need to get to on the disc brake. Now, I've already removed the cap, and what you're going to do is run a hose here to a suitable container, making sure that you don't splash any fluid when you're doing this operation, because any of that stuff on the paint is going to remove the paint. Now, what you want to do is crack that open and then squeeze the brake at the same time. You'll close this port before releasing the brake. That prevents any air from getting sucked into the system. And you're going to repeat that operation until you get clear liquid coming out of the bottom, out of the disc brake, and you have clear liquid inside the brake master cylinder. Then you're going to seal everything up and you're done. But you got to make sure you do this on both sides of the motorcycle. The rear brake is the same operation. You've got one disc to worry about. You got to take that port off, put the hose on there. It's the same exact process. The only difference is you're going to use the foot pedal to push the fluid out and only release it after you close up that port. And then again, you've got to get to the brake master cylinder, which is underneath the seat. Got the lid off of the master cylinder for the front brake, and you can see it's got some contamination in there. It's discolored. Definitely needs to be bled through or flushed. A couple squeezes didn't even produce any fluid, so I'm not even sure there was fluid in the brake line, but you can see how dirty, hopefully you can see how dirty that is. There's definitely a lot of contamination that needs to be removed, so the entire system's got to be flushed. Front brake is bled, both sides, and now I've got to move to the rear. And you can see once again how cloudy that is. That's condensation. That's going to cause corrosion in the system. Since this is just plastic, you don't see any corrosion, but there's probably corrosion in the line going back to the brake. So now need to bleed the rear brake. This is from the rear brake master cylinder, so you can tell that the fluid is filthy. That dirt wasn't in the container, that came out of the brake line. And the first few pumps of the brake did not release any brake fluid, so the brake line was actually dry down at the caliper. Now that the master cylinders, brake lines, and calipers are thoroughly bled, it's time to determine why the front calipers are frozen in place against the rotors. First thing I'm going to do is take off these two bolts that hold the caliper on and do some inspection. Very difficult time getting it off. It was seized on the rotor, and you can see how much corrosion and dirt is on these brake pads. The brake pads still look relatively good. I mean, they still got some life in it, but it's just filthy around this caliper, and that's probably why it's not releasing and letting the brake operate. And now with the brake pads removed, we see why the pistons aren't moving freely. There's a lot of corrosion in there. I'm going to soak it with WD-40 and see if that helps out. And clean up some of the other parts, get this all cleaned up, and put it back together. I've done some light cleaning, but what you can see here is some corrosion on that piston. And I pulled the brake caliper or the brake handle very carefully just to get those pistons out of their socket just a little bit. And that's got to be cleaned off. So I'm going to try to clean these off with some Scotch-Brite, hoping not to scratch them, and then reset them before I put the brake back on. But clearly this is the reason why it's frozen on the rotor. Quite a bit cleaner, but not perfect. But the emery cloth did clean up those pistons, and I've used some brake cleaner to get around all that other dirt around the clips. To simultaneously push both pistons back in their bore, I used a scrap piece of metal and a standard C-clamp. And while doing this, I made sure I kept my eye on the master cylinder so that I didn't push any fluid out during the compression. Next step involves cleaning all the attaching bolts and slide pins. This pin locks the disc pads in place and must allow free movement of the disc pads, especially when releasing the brake. And that concludes refreshing the brakes on this motorcycle. The front caliper is no longer bind on the rotors. I've got that all cleaned up. They're operating smoothly. The brake lines are all flushed. The master cylinders are cleaned out. They've got all brand new fluid in there, so everything is safe for operation. By the way, I did mention I'm trying to sell this. I'm going to put a link below in the description of this video if you're interested, so reach out. See you next time on Driving Intelligence.